like to give you a scenario to think about. A teacher comes to you to discuss a student whom she feels is struggling in geography. She talks about the classroom strategies that have been put in place to support the student. Despite these strategies, the student continues to struggle and as a result is beginning to hate geography. Parents are also frustrated with the geography work at home. As a principal, what would you do? Would you A, suggest that the student be exempted from geography? Or B, bring this student to a school team meeting to ensure appropriate and timely interventions to address the student's needs? You may find option A out of the question. We would rarely suggest that any student be exempted from geography. We know that there may be many reasons why that student is struggling. Obviously, we'd put in supports based on the specific student's needs that allow him or her to find success. But what if the student were struggling in French? Would your answer be the same? I hope you're asking yourself, well, why would it be any different? When I began teaching, there were many exemptions from FSL in Ontario. And now, as a principal over 20 years later, I find it discouraging that similar generalizations persist in Ontario. Let's turn these conversations into an opportunity for change. Let's discuss, principal to principal, why this idea persists that FSL is an obstacle for some learners. As decision makers, we have an opportunity to challenge the status quo, and it's long overdue. The research on the benefit of inclusion of all students in FSL is very clear. All students stand to make significant social, academic, and cognitive gains. Here are just a few examples. There is evidence, however, that groups of students are being exempted from FSL based on the outdated notion that French might be too difficult for certain groups of students. The message FSL is for all students seems to need reinforcement. Some of you might be familiar with psychologist Stephen Katz's position that we are only learning when beliefs or practices are called into question and challenged in ways that require a revision to what we think, believe, know, and do. So let's learn. Let's question and challenge our current beliefs and practices. Let's revise what we currently think, believe, know, and do. Take a look at the current situation. There are 3 official programs for FSL in Ontario. Core French, a mandatory program from grades 4 to 9, and the optional French immersion and extended French programs. Here is a snapshot of what participation might look like in a given year. In this graph, we see that in 2013-14, over 1 million students participated in FSL programs. This represents about 53% of all students in Ontario, many of whom are in Core French in grades 4 through 9. But we all know that students have different learning needs. So let's look at this data through a filter. Here you can see that students in FSL can be divided between those with and those without special education needs. The dark blue area represents students who have left the FSL program. As you can see, there is significant difference between 2 groups between grade 8 and grade 9. 44% of students with special education needs left Core French between grade 8 and grade 9. Why is there such a drastic drop for students with special education needs? There are 2 large groups of students that seem to be part of the story. As we just saw in the data, students with special education needs are a key group that is leaving the program. But another group that has been discouraged from FSL participation are English language learners. It's interesting to note that ample research exists stating that English language learners perform just as well or sometimes even better academically than their monolingual counterparts. Despite all of this, some decision makers think that learning French would be just one more obstacle for these students. So why does this problem exist? In my opinion, there are 3 main reasons why there is resistance to the inclusion of all students in FSL. The first being our knowledge of legislation and policy. People in education are busy people who are in the important business of learning. Sometimes when policies or legislations change, we may not be immediately aware. It's critical that policies and procedures are reviewed on a regular basis and that we talk about the implications. For example, until 2004, the Ministry Policy Program Memorandum provided for the possibility of exemptions from the Elementary Core French program. Since the revocation of PPM number 58 in 2004, however, there is no ministry policy outlining exceptions to the inclusion of all students in FSL programs. Despite this fact, there is evidence that groups of students are being exempted from FSL. Identifiers such as English language learner or special education needs should not automatically lead to exemptions from any subject. Occasionally, an exemption from FSL is considered based on individual needs and alternative programming. These case-by-case decisions should also take into account the student's strengths and interests and the potential benefits of learning French. The second reason for resistance to including all students in FSL is tradition. When I began my career as an FSL educator 20 years ago, I remember having many discussions with principals, colleagues, and parents about why students should take or remain in FSL. I'm a core French graduate from a small rural town in Ontario with no significant francophone presence, and yet I've worked hard to become bilingual. The fact that I speak 2 languages has supported me in many ways, from my career pathways and travel opportunities to making new friends. Thus, I believe speaking more than one language opens doors for people. So when I hear people say that a student may not benefit from FSL, I always wonder, how can we determine that at such a young age? No one knows where life will lead or what skills will benefit them in the future. When I became a principal, it became even more apparent that many people continue to believe that FSL is a burden for some students. Yet we never had the same conversations about the burden of reading for students with learning difficulties. Students who struggled in that area were given more support in order to achieve success. So is FSL really that different? I think part of the reason is legacy thinking. If something has been done for a very long time, it takes a focused conversation to change that practice. Because we know that the policy that did allow for an individual exemption from core French no longer exists, now is the time to talk about the practices and beliefs that accompanied that policy in order to determine whether or not they're still valid. The final reason is the most difficult: mindset. As I stated earlier, many people believe that for some students, French really is much too difficult for them to learn. Do you know anyone that speaks 3 or more languages? I do. One gentleman I have worked with came to Canada at the age of 7, knowing only German. Now he speaks 5 languages. He explained to me that it was his encounter in core French in Ontario, while learning both English and French, that opened the door to his learning even more languages. So I ask you, as a decision maker, do you make decisions for each individual student? When we speak about mindset, we need to look at our attitudes and beliefs about individual students' abilities, about what we believe regarding the value of learning languages, and about the quality of FSL programs we offer. I'm not saying that French is a choice for every single student in Ontario schools. I'm saying that it should be an option for every student, and that each student should be looked at individually. How do our beliefs manifest in our daily decision making? Does your school timetable offer a learning strategies course as a substitute for grade 9 core French? Are you doing this because it is assumed to be a given that any student with an IEP that takes that course should be automatically removed from French? What message does this send to parents and students about FSL? Here's another option. Maybe the learning strategies course might be a substitution for grade 9 geography because a student in question is very oral but struggles with large quantities of content in reading and writing. Or maybe another course is deferred for a year. There are lots of possibilities. Mindset is critical for decision makers to challenge the status quo. So why is any of this important? I'd like you to consider the following. Policy tells us we should care. There are many ministry policies that reinforce the idea that all students can learn. Take a look at these excerpts from a few of them. First of all, since 2004, there has been no form or policy outlining any exceptions to FSL programs in Ontario. The 2013 Learning for All policy states that all students can succeed. The 2009 Equity and Inclusive Education policy says that equity means responding to the individual needs of each student. And finally, a framework for FSL programs in Ontario promises that FSL is for all students. How can I, as a principal, believe that it's okay to exclude a group of students from an opportunity to learn? I think it's fair to say that policy is telling us something very different. Another reason it's so important is that the benefits of taking FSL have been documented in research. It's no secret that language learning supports development in many other areas. If you Google the benefits of learning a second language, there are countless research-based findings that appear. As you can see, the benefits include both the development of students' reading abilities and their ability to hypothesize in science. There's also a number of correlations between second language learning and improved cognitive skills, such as attention control, memory skills, and problem-solving abilities. If you prefer to focus on readily available ministry documents, these two will provide you with lots of research-based reasons to include all students in FSL. Not enough reason to challenge current thinking? Here's my third reason. It's time. It's time to move forward. Schools in Ontario are exploring how to prepare their students to lead fulfilling lives, be productive contributors, and thrive in a rapidly changing globalized world. Ontario is engaged in next-generation learning, which includes communication, critical thinking, collaboration, and problem-solving. These skills are viewed as essential in order to live, function in, and contribute to the 21st century. Students who learn a second language improve all four of these elements. Moreover, with the arrival of a framework for FSL in Ontario schools in 2013, and including students with special education needs in FSL programs in 2015, we now have the tools that we need to support the inclusion of all students in FSL. So where do we go from here? It's all fine and good to believe that all students can learn and should have the opportunity to participate in FSL, but if you are a principal who does not speak French, you may find it difficult to start these conversations back at your schools. For the past 3 years, I've had the privilege of working with the Provincial Principal Focus Group for FSL, whose mandate it is to support school administrators in strengthening French as a second language. This group has developed resources for principals and vice principals that help decision makers challenge the status quo. All of the supports are found on the Transforming FSL website, a resource dedicated to professional learning about French as a second language. I highly recommend bookmarking this site. Here is the site, and here is the section for principals and vice principals. The first resource I'd like to show you is called From Awareness to Action. Written by the Principal Focus Group, the print resources include topics ranging from the CEFR and engagement in FSL to instructional leadership in FSL and supporting all students. In these short issues, you will find links to documents, research, and quotes that can be easily inserted into school newsletters and websites. Next, a series of 2 videos called Supporting Students in FSL. The first video offers strategies to create the conditions for success in FSL for English language learners and students with special education needs. Principals speaking to principals. The second video focuses on teachers and captures practical strategies, including classroom practices and reflections from FSL educators. This video gives principals the opportunity to share these strategies with their school staff, including special education and guidance educators, to influence decision-making. There's also a viewer's guide for these videos, which offers activities to complete within schools. Finally, I'd like to show you a new resource that focuses on mindset. Supporting all students in FSL is an e-learning module for principals and vice principals that includes strategies and practical activities. The module promotes self-dialogue regarding the inclusion of English language learners and students with special education needs in FSL. It's broken down into 6 sections, allowing the user to leave the module if they cannot complete it in one sitting and return to the place where they left off. A certificate of completion is provided at the end of the module. So what can principals do today? Whenever I attend professional learning sessions, I know that if I don't take steps right away to incorporate the learning, it's unlikely that I'm going to change my behavior. If we're going to make changes that stick, we need to start now. There are 3 things that I would like you to consider starting today. First of all, realize that you don't have to speak French to support it. The vision for a school is usually set by the principal. Building a vision for a school is a collaborative activity that takes time and commitment to complete. Leaders who invest in developing shared beliefs about student learning and well-being find that student achievement improves. When the principal sends out a positive message about a program such as music or physical education, it usually means the program begins to flourish. I've been the principal at 2 schools where the music program is an essential part of the school and the greater community. This was because our school vision supported the arts. I myself do not play an instrument, but my support for these programs was appreciated, and as a result, they grew. You do not need to speak French in order to support the French program. Treat every student on an individual basis. Each time a student comes into your office, I'm certain that you think about him or her as an individual. But is this the case when it comes to school practices? I'd like you to think of one school practice related to FSL that could be reviewed. Perhaps it's your school website's presentation of the programs at your school. Or maybe it's the literature on FSL program options that are sent out during kindergarten registration. Or maybe it's the process used for transition meetings or timetabling. Whatever the practice, ask yourself, does this practice offer opportunity for all students or just some? What changes would make this practice more inclusive? Finally, spread the word. Talk with your colleagues. The best way to challenge the status quo is to talk to your colleagues about it. How did you feel during this talk? Were you comfortable or uncomfortable? If something made you uneasy, embrace that feeling. As Stephen Katz says, it's a sign that something is right. Learning has taken place. I propose that you start the conversation with at least one other person today. FSL inclusion may not be a topic where everyone sees eye to eye, but I firmly believe that in order to provide all students the same opportunity to succeed, it's a conversation that needs to happen. Remember, FSL is for all.